Broadcasting from the Faith Bunker in a secret location, Sheep Below Ministries presents The Bunker Brothers.
We are Christian men, fathers, and husbands, but we are also former correctional officers. Just like everyone who has ever been in the first responder world, you know that it can change your view on everything.
A while back, we decided to dig into our Christianity, its people, theology, apologetics, and history. We try to do this with humor, honesty, and respect. Now, we want to include you in our conversation. I'm Daniel Audette.
And I'm Andrew Graham. And together we are
The Bunker Brothers.
Now.
All right. We're back with another episode of
Bunker Brothers.
Graham, we've been doing a great series. I'm really looking forward to this next one about the 5 things that you have to believe to be a Christian. And we've discussed the fact that there are some people who kind of think you don't need to believe any specific thing, that Christianity is maybe a social club, or it's just what your parents did, or it's a lot of good feelings and a lot of platitudes. And
I like platitudes. You can put a lot of turkey on them.
But the fact of the matter is that we realize that, no, there are some things that you have to believe to call yourself a Christian.
Yep, and we've covered 2 of them already. So we've covered the virgin birth.
Virgin birth.
We got to talk about Mary.
Yes, indeed.
And we've talked about the sinless life of Christ.
Sinless life.
He didn't do nothing bad.
So what are the 3 others?
So we've got the death of Jesus.
Death of Jesus.
He had to die.
Mm-hmm.
We got the resurrection of Jesus.
Resurrection.
In order to resurrect, he had to die.
Right.
And he had to resurrect to come back again.
Right.
For the imminent return.
Which is the last one, which is the imminent return of Jesus Christ, or at the very least, Jesus Christ.
And if I confused anybody, number 3 is the death of Jesus. Number 4 is the resurrection of Jesus. Number 5 is the imminent return of Jesus.
Or at the very least, as some people say, the return of Christ, or second coming. So whichever way you want to term that. I do believe that Jesus Christ is imminently returning. I believe that.
Well, that's good.
I believe that.
Since we're sitting here saying you have to believe these things to call yourself a Christian.
Sure. But I think that some people have different interpretations. I've said that before on these episodes. Have different interpretation on how and when and where and why the return will be. And but we do understand Scripture is very clear, and we'll touch on that when we get to that episode about how clear the Word of God is about the imminent return of Jesus Christ. How about that? So, those are 5 things you have got to believe. And I can say it because, hey, there are some things that are the foundations of Christianity. Tonight, we're taking up the number 3, third one, which is Jesus Christ's death. And it's easy to roll right into the resurrection, but we have to understand that is, another point that some people leave Jesus Christ at the point of death and never get him resurrected. But there are some people who just don't understand the death of Jesus Christ. Or there are those who don't really believe that Jesus Christ himself actually died. That it was some sort of...
Or at least not then.
Or some sort of spiritual form of him that faked his death or something like that, other than an actual person dying on the cross. And I think that we know there are folks who believe that way, but Graham, that is not what the Word of God shows happened.
No, it's not at all. Sorry about the pause there.
This pause was brought to you by Andrew Graham.
Yay, because I'm a loser.
He thinks, therefore he grams.
Really?
Yep, absolutely.
So, I've heard several times what actually happened on the cross to explain why Jesus didn't die on the cross.
Mm-hmm.
I think probably the most popular is, he swooned. He didn't actually die. He passed out and he looked like he was dead from loss of blood and loss of, having a bad day on the cross. If there's a good day on the cross, I'd like to know about it. But, it looked like he was dead. He was almost dead, or as the guy in The Princess Bride said, he's mostly dead, and mostly dead is not all dead. Let's talk about the swoon theory right quick, just because I know that you and I can both do this without a lot of notes.
You aren't kidding.
So let's explain what crucifixion does first of all.
Man, it's pretty bad. I mean, this is a death where you're going to live through your own death for a long time. This is a torture.
You're going to live through your own death.
Yeah, you're going to wish you were dead well before you're actually dead. So crucifixion's goal was not to bleed you out. This is very important. A lot of people get mistaken. You weren't going to die from just like blood loss. This wasn't a decapitation. This wasn't something like that. This was death by total agony of asphyxiation. So you're going to die ultimately in the end by not having strength enough to push your body up off of the cross or whatever you're crucified on, so that you're pushing against the nail in your feet or nails in your feet, pinned that way, pressing yourself forward up into the air off of the cross you're on, so to get a gasp of breath. And you're going to repeat this because the way you're hanging is dragging your body down to a point where you can't breathe right. So you will asphyxiate.
Your body weight is actually keeping you from breathing.
Yes, you're going to asphyxiate.
Now, let's point out something else that I think a lot of people overlook, because I did for a long time. The Romans reused these crosses. They weren't one and done things.
Well, why would you? I mean, why would you waste? They weren't wasteful.
And so they were dragged all over everywhere.
Yeah.
They were put up, taken down. What happens to things when you put them up and take them down and drag them all over the countryside?
Well, first of all,
especially if they're wooden.
Well, first of all, there was no reason to retain these. I mean, this was just a tool like anything else of death.
Right.
So you wouldn't keep this around. You wouldn't. You store it, you clean it, you throw it away, you burn it. Whatever you're going to do with it, it's not going to be kept for anything. There's nothing special to a Roman about a cross. It's just a tool.
So we use them today.
Mm-hmm.
We get the guys down off of them. We got more guys tomorrow that we need to kill.
Right.
So we drag it back into town.
Right.
We make them drag it back out of town.
Sure.
We put it up. We've taken it down. We do this for a week or so till it gets wore out.
It could be, and have a new one made.
By the time that possibly by the time that Jesus is hanging on it, you've got a piece of wood that is splintered. It's nasty.
Mm-hmm.
It's covered in blood and filth and dirt and everything else.
Yeah.
What happened to Jesus before he was crucified?
Well, I mean, you have him being brutalized, and he had his a flailing, if you want to call it that. I mean, Cat of Nine Tails was no joke. We're talking about bone and iron tipped whips that don't just hit you, but also draw your flesh off.
So he's got a ruined back.
Mm-hmm.
And he's hanging on a piece of wood that is splintered and nasty.
Yeah, likely.
And he's having to push himself up and down this piece of wood
to be able to breathe.
Just to tell you how bad crucifixion actually was.
Sure.
Just imagine raking your already torn back up and down over a rough, splintered piece of wood.
Oh yeah, yeah. This is
not a nice shaped, varnished piece of wood.
Oh, this is definitely not. No, this is definitely not a worry cross. It's all nice and smooth.
And so,
put your pocket and you feel it, and it comforts you. This is not that. This is a very brutal way of going. And the Romans were really good at it. In fact, the Romans were so good that they knew, and good at this, that they would specifically insert the nails and avoid putting it through the vein in your wrist, because it was below the wrist, not up in your hand where they would nail at. And there's diagrams you can look at online to show the proper placement. But right below that area, and they would actually nail, bypassing around the vein that runs up and then down the other side in your hand, so it didn't break your artery that's in your wrists. But they would run the nail right beside the nerve that ran in your wrist, and then they'd nail it in. So it was excruciating. It was painful. It was horrific, and it was effective. And you will ultimately run out of energy to push yourself off. You're going to run out of energy. You're not being fed. you're not being, there's a lot of things. So you are bleeding if you've been whipped. You are bleeding some from that. That's true, but you're not gonna die by just dying. You're gonna die by agony.
I'm not even worried about the bleeding so much. It's just the thought of dragging a seriously injured. I mean, this could have killed him in and of itself.
Well, remember that the Romans were again very good at methods of torture, especially when they considered someone who should die. They weren't just the kind of individuals that did it the easy way. So let me explain on this one. To give you an example, when Paul was talking about the fact that he felt like he couldn't get rid of his sinful nature. And Paul said, who will deliver me from this body of death? Well, if you learn a little bit about Roman history, I don't know everything, but I know a little bit. I've taken some time to study some things. He's referring to a torture method the Romans would use, the body of death. You say, well, what do you mean? So my perspective here, Romans didn't have a problem doing this. It was a torture, but they had no problem, because here's another torture they did. So Paul said, who will deliver me from this body of death? My corrupted flesh seems to be bothering me. I can't seem to get away from it. So who's going to deliver me? And at the end of that, he talks about the fact it's Jesus that's going to be the one that's delivering him. So he gives you the hope of this. But meanwhile, that kind of torture was actually a specific one where they would bind the victim to the corpse of a dead person. And then you simply rotted, but you were alive.
Face to face.
Yeah. So Paul is referencing a common form of extreme torture.
That would just be nasty.
And Paul is saying that's what having our flesh body and dealing with our sinful nature is much like. We're being corrupted by something that's dead. Who's going to deliver me from this body of death? It was torture to Paul. And so Paul referenced a torture method. Now remember, the Romans that came up with that one are the same Romans who perfected, and I say perfected, crucifixion. It was a science.
Well,
and they crucify people all the time.
The major vein in the arm or in the wrist to make sure you didn't bleed out before they were ready for you to die.
Absolutely.
That's pretty serious.
But asphyxiation, by the way, asphyxiation is the way you're going to die, because you're going to run out of energy and the ability to willfully push yourself back up, right?
And so basically your lungs are going to fill up with fluid.
Yes, it is. And also,
because you can't get breath in correctly.
So when Jesus Christ did die, what was the unique thing about when they came to mourning? What did they find about Jesus? He was dead, but the other guys weren't.
Right.
So what did they do to speed up their death?
They broke their legs.
Exactly. And what did they do to confirm Jesus was actually dead? They put a spear into his side.
Right.
They didn't put a spear into the side of the other two guys because they were still alive. They had made it through the night. And so to make sure they couldn't push themselves up to get a breath, what did they do? They broke their legs too. And of course, in the Old Testament, what does it say? That his bones were all accounted for. In other words, the prophecy being fulfilled that Jesus would not be crucified having his legs broken.
Right.
Not that he wouldn't be crucified.
Well, and I find it interesting that I actually looked up that verse about the spear. And it's John 19:34. And it says, "But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once there came out blood and water." Mm-hmm. Now, people have questioned the water part of that. But what they're getting is if they pierced his lung, they're getting that fluid that built up in the lungs from the asphyxia.
So medically speaking, there is a sac of liquid around your heart. And there's liquid there. And if you have a tremendous labor and your heart goes under extreme pressure, and I'm talking extreme, and crucifixion would definitely...
I think crucifixion would fit as extreme.
That sac will burst, and it will run down, and it'll fill up whatever's down there, whatever cavity it's below.
Basically your lung.
Your body, yeah. Well, and so what happens is that if they pierce the side, they would have come out with water and blood.
Right.
Mainly because of the sac around his heart bursting. Some
now,
people will reference.
Some
people will reference that Jesus' heart broke for you, and that's kind of where they get that.
Right, and we know this because of modern medical science, and we've seen these things, and we understand how it works.
You know it from digging up the people who have died from Roman crucifixion.
Well, I'm talking about the sac around the heart and
sure.
But I find it interesting that they can't. I mean, Why would they have said water unless it was actually there?
Yeah,
that's a strange phrase to use unless that's what you're actually seeing.
Well, if that sac burst, that would explain it. I mean, it wasn't just a blood spurt. It was actual running. It was very liquidy and not quite as thick as blood. They knew what it was. They knew exactly what it was. And and they may have even seen it before. It's not that weird to them.
Well, the Romans would have known what it was, but the people writing the Gospels may not have.
Well, it just meant that Jesus died under extreme physical duress.
I just find it interesting that the biblical account from 2,000 years ago matches what medical science says now would actually happen.
And there are some really good articles you can go look at,
through it.
Medically
I think we can agree that Jesus probably didn't just pass out.
No, he did not swoon. No. Mm-mm.
Okay, well what about the theory that basically the disciples made it all up? There was a big conspiracy, and they took him off the cross, and they got him buried, and maybe they moved his body afterward, and all the conspiracies that go along with the death.
I mean, I would say that if you wanted to claim that, you could claim that every religion in the world is made up. Then, I mean, I could claim anything. I can claim anything's made up if I don't want to believe it. I can claim that it was made up. Am I correct? So. But then we have a issue with the historical nature of Jesus Christ, the undeniable historical evidence about this man. We have the record, which people dismiss because it's in one book. But originally it wasn't one book. There were different individuals who witnessed what happened. It changed their lives. They told others. They had no gain from it. There was nothing to gain. And there was no motive that would show that they had any reason otherwise than something tremendous had happened. And so, did they make it up? Well, it didn't get them anything. It didn't make their lives better. And I say that careful.
No, it made
because
it worse.
You could say it did make their lives better because they believed they were saved and they knew they were. But it surely didn't make things better for them. I mean, one of them.
Not physically.
I mean, every one of them pretty well were executed, killed, and or martyred for what they believed in.
All but one.
And John was in exile when he wrote, his thing. So he
had a rough time of it. I'm not saying he didn't, but
so could the disciples have made it up? And the answer is, well, we're 2,000 years worth of asking that question, still asking that question.
Well, see, my thing has always been, I've heard my whole life, you can keep a secret between two people as long as one of them's dead.
Yeah.
You're talking about 12 people who are telling a massive lie. And none of them recant it at any time,
and for no gain. I think that's one of the hardest. Most to me, if you had something you're gaining from it, that would make sense. Well, they were gaining power and money.
No,
not in the first century, not in the second century, not in the third century.
Well, they never saw that.
Yeah, they didn't experience that, man, and. So I think it's interesting to note that the people often will refer to the idea of them trying to have power and control. These guys were often the ones who refused to take anything for what they were doing, said that they could take money if they wanted to and refused to do so. These guys...
Well, Paul said that.
Paul did say it. But the point is that it doesn't match the motive. You got to match the motive. If the motive is... false, then their activities would be false. But their activities are just and right, so we know that something just and right was being reflected by them.
Well, and here's the thing that's always fascinated me: it's not just the disciples saying this. Probably the most famous extra biblical source for the crucifixion of Jesus is in a writing by Josephus. Flavius Josephus,
and that has been recently.
He sounds pretty Roman, doesn't he?
Well, he was actually a Jewish.
He was a Roman Jew,
and he served the Roman army, and he chronicled Jewish history.
Well, see, and here's the thing: is he didn't write this section about Jesus.
No, it wasn't his goal. That wasn't what he was doing.
The part that he writes about Jesus was in his history of Pilate.
That's true.
Who was the Roman governor. If he's writing a Roman history, he's going to write about the Roman governor.
Sure.
And he talks about and it starts with, about this time lived Jesus, a wise man, if indeed one ought to call him a man. That's the first sentence of his paragraph or so about Jesus.
Right.
But he goes on down to say, let me find the right spot, sorry about that. When he was indicted by the principal men among us, and Pilate condemned him to be crucified, those who had come to love him originally did not cease to do so. For he appeared to them on the third day restored to life, as the prophets of the deity had foretold these and countless other marvelous things about him. So he
The end. Josephus leaves that story. Josephus was not a convert. He wasn't trying to get anybody to believe in Jesus.
No.
He just noted a historical event and he moved on.
Yeah, and that's I've read you about half of what he actually wrote about it.
Yeah.
But he has no. He's not saying that he believes it, but he's saying that's what they're claiming. He does say that Pilate condemned him to be crucified, which to me is what we're talking about today.
Right.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves to the resurrection. But, it says Pilate condemned him to be crucified. Period.
Right.
I think that's a pretty strong evidence outside of the biblical narrative.
Another thing that's interesting about Jesus Christ and his crucifixion is a note that the method by which the judiciary system being described accurately matched both the people, place, and the time, and the method of how this case would have been adjudicated. Because the reason they had to go to Rome, the Jews couldn't kill them themselves, was it was illegal for them to actually kill a person for their religious reasons without having Roman approval.
Right.
There's a reason for that, because it got pretty brutal, especially between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. They actually went through a period of time where they were actually quite murderous toward each other. I mean, quite murderous, actually.
Next show, I get to tell my Sadducees joke.
Do you?
Yes.
Not this show?
Not this show.
Okay. So, they were put under control, and Roman control meant you're not going to execute people for wantonly for your religious violations without running it through us first.
Right.
So that means on the few occasions you'll find, especially around 8 and 9 and 10, around that area for Jesus when he went to the Feast of the Tabernacles, the 2 times they had tried to stone him to death, on those 2 occasions, that was an illegal attempt to take his life.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Did you know that was interesting? It was a legal attempt they actually tried to do to take his life, and that's what we're talking about. One of the things about legal matters is that it's historically based. A legal matter is historically based. A legal matter today is based in our current history. And Jesus' matter was a current history item. He was taken before one guy, and he said, "Not have him be taken before someone who can handle this matter for these people." And then that guy, sent him back up to, back and forth he goes, and now he's standing before Pilate for a final judgment.
Right.
And Pilate does something that matches Roman tradition, which is
the washing of the hands.
To release someone in place.
Right.
And the washing of the hand. And so Pilate's aware of what's going on. It matches a narrative of what would logically happen.
And it matches the Roman history.
You'd have to have written it in that time for it to match it correctly. But the fact is, did Jesus Christ, was he actually condemned to die? And the answer is yes, he was. I mean, it's not unusual. I don't see a problem with him. The death of him. He was a guy. He was a person. He died. Romans didn't like him. People didn't like him. They had him killed. The significance is what we'll get to on next episode.
No teasers here.
We're really trying not to get there on this one.
Well, it's kind of hard not to do the two together.
So you were reading an article about the idea that Romans really didn't crucify?
Yeah, I think I actually closed that article because I didn't find it to be worth reading.
Well, isn't it weird because we dig up bodies?
But let me look it up again.
We actually dig up enough corpses from Rome with holes in them to show that they did crucify.
If you Google Jesus did not die on the cross,
yeah,
it's the very first thing that pops up, and it's from the Telegraph, which is a UK newspaper.
So does the article that you're looking at with that title prove Jesus did not die on the cross?
Well, it's the headline is Jesus did not die on cross, says scholar. And as soon as the ad goes away...
Mm-hmm. See, I knew it. They were lying. Jesus didn't die on a cross. See? And everybody said he died on a cross. See, they were lying. That's exactly what this article is directly being created to cause people to say.
And the problem is the article goes on to say not that he didn't die, but that maybe a cross, two pieces of wood in a T shape, whether it's a lowercase t or an uppercase T, would not have been the way that they would have done it. They would have hung him on a pole, or they wouldn't have wasted the extra piece of wood. They're not saying he didn't die. They're not even saying he wasn't hung from something. They're just saying that the cross shape may not be accurate. My problem with this is the headline,
right,
where it says Jesus didn't die on the cross. Well, that's a little bit misleading to what you're actually saying. Now,
right.
if you want to make a scholarly report about crucifixion or being hung on a pole, I don't know what you'd call it. It's obviously not crucifixion, but if you want to make that kind of scholarly argument, fine. I don't have any issue with that, because I don't know that it matters whether he was hung on a cross, two pieces of wood nailed together, or if he was hung on a single piece of wood, or if he was hung on a wall somewhere. That doesn't really matter to me.
Well,
the shape of the instrument is not important.
And of course, the reason we have any kind of insight on what the way Jesus would die is because of the Old Testament specifically. The Old Testament says that a person who was hung on a tree is cursed. And we understand that there are various ways people were hung, even the Old Testament, even to the New Testament. The word hang can mean several things, as we've discussed on previous shows.
Right.
But we also understand very specifically that this is also a reference in the Old Testament to when the bronze snake was raised before the people. And he said, so my son will also be lifted up before them.
Right.
And he'll draw all men unto him. It's kind of really looking at Christ. And so we understand that. The Old Testament shows that he would be crucified, or gives emphasis on the hanging on a tree concept. But you can fulfill it more than one way. But we know one thing, this is the tree or wood, a wooden object is involved.
Right.
Now, whether you have a cross piece and he's hitched to it and he carries it up and it's cinched up into place on a pole, that's fine. These poles, they didn't go put up poles every time they crucified like you started with. This was pretty well common done. It was a normal execution. They didn't remake the gas chamber or the electric chair every time they went to go use it.
Right.
They had these poles standing ready, more than likely, and they took the piece. And the only difference is that we do know that they nailed Christ specifically through his feet and through his hands, and that's an interesting thing to note. So whether it was nailed down and then raised up into its place for that specific occasion, or whether it was a pole he was lifted up and cinched up onto, doesn't matter, because the fact is that he was nailed through his feet and through his hands. Now let me say this real quick.
Well, as I said, the shape of the instrument
there were
matter.
times when Romans did not have prepared crucifixion crosses. And let me also explain that a cross is also a natural shape to crucify a person on,
it's
because
the shape of the body.
It's a pole to hold it up and a cross piece to hold you on. It's kind of obvious here that we do
It's
that.
the basic shape of the body, so it makes sense.
And the eyewitnesses will go on to call this what? A cross, ultimately cross. And there's actually depictions, even in the time of Rome, where people etched in shapes that were cross-like into things depicting crucifixion. So it's not that this, it was a cross. Now, granted, it might not look quite like our nicer crosses we show on churches. It might not have been balanced. Might not have been balanced top to bottom, left to right. One reason we get some of the shape concepts for the cross is because there was room enough above Jesus Christ to post something.
Yeah, the placard.
Yeah.
Says Jesus, King of the Jews.
So there was room enough above them to post it. So that's one of those reasons we know that there was something above his head, because there was a placard placed above his head. Why eyewitnesses saw it. We know that he was crucified, that they had nailed through his feet. And we know that he was crucified with his arms nailed to the crosspiece. We also know that from Roman times, they had the typical way of actually nailing you with your knees slightly bent. It's important to know this, because that meant that you had to actually push yourself up and off and away.
It gives you the ability to do that, too.
It cramps you as well.
Right.
So the idea that we see in some pictures of a very beautiful, graceful Jesus Christ, on a cross, sweetly draped, and on the cross and all that, that some people depict is probably not realistic.
Well, if you try to tell me there's anything beautiful about actual crucifixion,
one of the things that
I'm going to laugh at you.
One of the things that's disturbing to people is he was a little closer to the ground than people imagine.
Yeah.
He wasn't so far away.
Yeah, why would they make it really, really tall? I mean, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
It's just a waste of wood.
Well, you know what, Graham? It's time for a break.
Already?
Yeah, man. And we will be right back with more of the Bunker Brothers and the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, his death, right after this. We're back after the break with more of the Bunker Brothers and the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, and this time with 50% more Daniel.
I don't want 50% more Daniel. I get enough of him. Anyway, so we were talking about before the break the Telegraph article from the UK.
Oh, yeah.
That said Jesus didn't die on the cross.
Sure.
And they're making a big deal out of the shape of the instrument that he died on.
Which is
irrelevant. They don't even argue that he died.
It's irrelevant.
They just argue the shape of the thing that he was hung on.
Sure.
Don't even say he wasn't hung on something. They just say it was it might have been a straight pole. I said to you earlier, the only reason they're making a big deal out of the shape of this thing is because it was Jesus.
That's right.
If Jesus wasn't hung on this thing, nobody would care what shape it was.
Out of all the people, I think what's interesting, on one occasion, Rome crucified up to 200 people outside of some of the cities in Judea.
Oh, they would line the streets with them.
Well, yeah, they did it so that everyone there would understand, don't rebel against us.
Right.
Don't make that mistake. And so 200, at least a couple hundred people were involved in that specific crucifixion event. Now,
name one of them.
Any one, right. But now, are they just as important individually? Well, I mean, I'm going to say, yeah, sure, they are important, but they're also
beings. They're important.
We also have no idea who they are. But this one man is the one causing the conflict. This one man, and you're right. There are actually, in that crowd of 200, there might have been another man with a name Jesus. It wasn't an uncommon.
There's probably more than one.
It wasn't an uncommon name. Because it's the iteration of the word of the name Joshua for that time period. So it's not that uncommon.
Well, and if you go back, Joshua and Josiah and a lot of these J names we have in the Bible, because
Hosea is actually the same name,
because the Hebrew alphabet actually doesn't have a letter J.
Right.
And that's actually a Greek concoction that was added in later.
Yeah.
So a lot of these J names are actually all the same name.
Sure.
They gave them different variations because of the time period.
Language drift, it's called.
And to differentiate between Joshua in the Old Testament and Josiah in the Old Testament and Jesus in the New Testament.
Well, language drift. It's language drift. It happens in every language. And by the way, it's one of the biblical proofs of the text.
Yeah. It really
one of the biblical proofs of the text is that the name Joshua, Yeshua, would become the same name as Jesus or Hosea or Joshua or any like that. It's the same root name.
Right.
And as time goes by, your language drifts. And it happens all the time, every time. So that's just how it is. But we understand that if this was anyone else, they wouldn't bother with him.
No, they wouldn't. They wouldn't care one way or the other.
Well, why would they bother with this guy?
I'll give you a great example of that. everybody, and people are not going to believe me. Go look this up. Double check me on it. If I'm wrong, let me know.
Sure.
You've heard of Iron Maidens?
Sure.
The big coffin looking thing with the spikes in it.
Yeah, the supposed method of execution by putting
execution torture device. Mm-hmm. They didn't exist. We've never found one.
And I've heard what you're saying before.
They've never found one actually intact or otherwise.
Right.
That would make anybody. This is a third grader's dream that somebody has put into literature, put into art somewhere. And everybody thinks they're real things, and we've never found one. I don't know that they weren't real. I just know we've never found one, and I think we would have by now.
I think we probably would have by now. You are correct.
We know there were guillotines.
Sure.
We know there were other torture devices. By the way, I wrote a term paper in college on torture devices. I know a lot about torture devices.
Boy, that's pretty morbid, man.
Well, yeah, that's what my instructor said, too. My father said, I hope nobody ever looks through your computer because they'll get the wrong idea about you.
Right. Well, let me say this as we say this.
Say this as we say this?
Yeah. How many disciples were there? Let's just start on that one.
Well,
minus Judas, include Matthias. You
so
still have how many?
12.
Still at 12. Okay. And how many of them authored a specific section of Scripture where they make the claims concerning Christ? Peter, John,
Matthew, Jude.
Right, and remember Luke said he wasn't one of the 12, but I was there
with them.
I saw it. I was there.
So 5 or 6.
How many people wrote about Socrates? Now let me ask you a question. Let me ask you this. Do you think Socrates, the Greek teacher, was real?
Well, yeah.
Why would you doubt that Socrates exists? Why would you ever?
No.
No.
Because
right.
Because of the lineage there. You got Socrates to Plato to Aristotle.
Yeah, but the only person who wrote about him was Plato.
Right.
One. Only the writings of Plato. Only. There's no evidence.
Well, we know, but if Plato wrote about it, it must be true because he wrote about Atlantis.
Yep.
Oh, wait a minute. and I'm not saying that Socrates didn't live.
I'm not saying that.
I believe he did.
I'm going to say
that Plato lived.
I'm going to say
that
if
Aristotle lived.
But I'm going to say if I'm going to believe that. Let me say this right. If I'm going to believe that Socrates lived, based off of his one student Plato, why wouldn't I believe that Jesus Christ lived? Based off of all of those witnesses you just named.
And they were basically his students.
That absolutely.
So the analogy holds up there.
Absolutely.
Plus you've got other people that wrote about Jesus.
Absolutely. Now some people might say other people mention Socrates, but I got to tell you, almost everything we know about him is from Plato.
Now, something that you like to talk about.
And I would never question whether Socrates was or wasn't.
No, not at all.
But they'll question whether Jesus was or
I'm going to put you on the spot for a minute.
Because Jesus is the Son of God. That's why. Go ahead, sir.
In case y'all didn't hear that, he said because Jesus is the Son of God.
Yeah, that's what messes the whole thing up for him, man.
I'm going to throw this at you, and I'm going to tell you it's off the cuff. We hadn't discussed it tonight. Let's talk about the ossuaries.
Ossuaries?
The bone boxes.
Okay.
Because they have found bone boxes that have Jesus, son of Joseph, brother of James.
Yeah.
You know, that match the exact family that we know of from Jesus.
Sure.
So how would you explain that?
I'll tell you. There's a guy by the name of Daniel Audette.
I know, I'm sitting next to him.
No, he's dead. There's a guy, his name...
No, he's not. He's right here.
No, there's a guy, he's in his 40s, and he passed away in St. Louis area. And his name is Daniel Audette. If you go look at his body, his name is Daniel Audette. He is of...
Well, his name can't be Daniel Audette because you're Daniel Audette and you can only be the only one.
Well, but the thing is that he is Daniel Audette, but he's just not me. But he's dead. So and his name and guess what? You know what? He looks a lot like me. Because he comes from the same background. He's not one of my direct cousins. Obviously, he'd be related, but it's so distant. But he looks just like me.
But now, are you saying that Jesus was a popular name during that time period?
So was Mary. So was Joseph. So was any
James.
Man, these names were not unusual, man. And also, you named people often historically off of your past family, so names get carried on regularly.
Well, I think it's funny that people make a big deal out of Joseph, Jesus, son of Joseph, when one of the people we've quoted tonight's name was Joseph.
But remember, the thing isn't that they found one of these; it's that they've found several of these. They keep finding the grave of Jesus.
Right.
If you keep finding them, after a while you
Different
realize
ones.
that these are different Yeshuas or people with that name. So you have to understand.
Basically, it's like finding a grave that says Danny, son of Eddie.
Right.
These are very common names. We all know 5 Eddies. We all know 5 Dannys.
Yeah.
That's not going to prove a whole lot.
They're Marys.
That are married to Mary.
The problem isn't about. The problem isn't really about Jesus' name being common amongst his time. The problem that we have is, or a situation we have, is the uniqueness of this individual. And I think that's the issue.
Well, and what I find interesting is if Jesus had an ossuary, and we know he doesn't, but if he did, don't you think they would have mentioned that there were people running around calling this guy the Messiah?
Well, that's also another thing that's not a very superlatively Jewish way of taking care of your bones during that time. And I say this carefully because there's different traditions at different times for how you would prepare your body. And so it just depends how you did it. And
I prepare my body with Old Spice.
Well, you have to understand, and I say this carefully because
every morning in the shower.
I'm saying this carefully because
you're not laughing at my joke.
Oh my gosh, I'm saying this carefully because
he's getting way too serious. I'm trying to lighten him up.
But the method that would have in the time when Christ would have died, his body would not have been removed or changed much in location. That's just not. They're misunderstanding how graves in some families worked. And there are cultural times where ossuaries would have been used to re-put the bones. But actually, in these days, they didn't really care so much. They'd throw all the bones together. It really didn't matter whose bones it was half the time. So I'm just trying to say that the tradition, the death of Christ, his body would have stayed in the tomb, wrapped in state, and had stayed there. That'd have been it.
But it didn't stay there.
Well, it didn't stay there, sure. But there's a reason for that, because
he's the Son of God.
Because there could be 3 Jesuses walking down that street, but only one of them. That's the whole thing about the crucifixion here. The crucifixion would be meaningless. It was just another man on that cross. Crucifixions weren't even that unusual.
No.
So what wasn't a crucifixion wasn't even that significant. But it was who was on the cross crossed. There's no T. It was who was on. That's like crimson. There's no P. On the cross, the crimson blood. No. But it was who was on it. Now you were running across something interesting you were bringing out, and I want to hear it.
I wanted to talk about this because I found it really interesting. The Islamic tradition. We know that Islam actually does revere Jesus as a major prophet.
Sure.
And they do have some amount of respect for Jesus as a prophet.
This is true.
They're wrong. But, they do mention him by name, and we know we're talking about the same Jesus. No question about that. The Muslims don't believe that Jesus died on the cross.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a couple of different variations of this. And I'm going on pure research. I'm not saying that I'm a Muslim expert.
Mm-hmm.
But the one that I find really interesting, and let me find it. I want to read it to you so I don't mess it up.
Go for it.
Number one, they go with the swoon theory. He wasn't on the cross long enough to actually die.
The biblical record would contradict that.
They'll use that one. Then Here's my favorite one. Jesus' crucifixion did not last long enough for him to die, while others opine that God gave Jesus' appearance to the one who revealed his location to those persecuting him.
Okay.
So,
what now?
So it was actually Judas that was hung on the cross, but God made Judas look like Jesus, so they thought they killed Jesus.
And okay, there's no narrative that supports that. And Judas was already dead at this time, and he was hung in a different way. So you've misunderstood what hung here is.
The first time I read that or heard that, I about fell out of my chair.
We've already established that Judas hung himself,
right, from rocks,
by impaling himself, or throwing himself into the rocks below. That's the head. Read it; it's in the Bible, and explains why he bursts asunder. And the field. It's all predicted, but here's the thing. Yeah, he was already out of the picture by the time the crucifixion takes place.
I just find that one just blows my mind that anybody could even come up with that one. Now, their third option, which is a little bit metaphysical, I'll be honest, said the third explanation could be that Jesus was nailed to a cross, but as his soul is immortal, he did not die or was not crucified to death. It only appeared so. In opposition to the second and third foregoing proposals, yet others maintain that God does not use deceit, and therefore they contend that the crucifixion just did not happen. So there's actually four options.
Okay, so
none of them are supported by the biblical narrative.
So here's the problem with all of that. The people who were there and bore witness said, this is what happened. And why would I not believe what they saw? By the way, there's no problem with what they saw, believing it.
No.
Even if Jesus didn't resurrect. Let me make this clear. What would be wrong with the facts of the story? Nothing.
Nothing.
Because the facts are the facts.
Well, and I like your Plato reference or your Plato comparison, because it's an apt comparison in my mind. That Socrates was the teacher of Plato, Jesus was the teacher of the disciples.
Right.
The biggest argument is, well, the only evidence you have is from his disciples, and they're biased. Well, Plato would have been biased. What gives him credence is the fact that he was taught by Socrates.
Right.
So that would have been his bias, and he would have actually gotten something out of it.
Sure.
Jesus' disciples didn't get anything out of it.
Yeah, right.
So I really like that comparison. I've never thought about it, but you're spot on with it.
There are a lot of characters that we could talk about in ancient periods that have very little written about them that you and I believe exist because people have a tradition concerning it or have a story about it. Christianity is not one of those situations. We have eyewitness reports. We have documented evidence, proof, archaeological evidence, cultural facts that match. We have quite a lot of stuff that goes on. But in the end, that isn't what's going to save you. What's going to save you is that this is the Son of God.
That's why we keep mentioning
it. But it blows it. It blows everything. It blows. That's Graham taking it to the next level every time. But that's what changes the whole thing. I mean,
I want to throw one more thing at you, and this is another kind of off the cuff thing. And I want to check my reference and make sure I've got this right. They crucified him. They wrote King of the Jews. Soldiers crucified him. They took his garments. I don't have it. So okay, I must have that mixed up with something else. We're gonna cut that part out. Thank you. So I find it interesting that we always call Matthew, Mark, and Luke the synoptic gospels, And they are pretty much the same story told the same way. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to the death of Jesus, all the stories read just about identically. So you've got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and they're all telling the exact same story because they all know it's one of the really important parts of the story.
Right.
And they all tell it almost word for word. Now they've got different little flares, they've got different writing styles, but really, if you look at just the headings of the sections, the headings of the sections are exactly the same. Mm-hmm. It's amazing how close the Gospels really are to each other. Even though we don't know that all of them were actually there to witness it.
Well, we know Matthew was there. He records it. He was there. Well, when John records it, man, John's view is a little different. Notice that Peter did not record it. I want to say this very
Peter
carefully.
wasn't there.
Right. This is important to note.
Right.
Peter didn't write by the way, this is how it happened, because Peter wasn't there right at the moment.
Right.
If he was, he didn't bother writing it down. But what about John? Where was John at?
John was with Mary.
John was with Mary. Where was Mary at?
Right there.
Within earshot. Within earshot.
She was at the foot of the cross, literally.
She was within earshot of Jesus.
Right.
She was there, right there, as close as she could get without being removed, because she knew how delicate the situation was. And John was right there. So you're not talking about someone way out over here, or a reporter over on the edge, or someone flying over with a blimp. We're talking about
they didn't have blimps then.
Yeah, I'm saying, but you've got someone sitting right there, standing at the scene, and so John, he was eyewitnessing right there. Matthew, where was he? Somewhere there. Where was Mark? Well, Mark wasn't there. Mark authored a gospel because he was serving Gentiles.
Right.
And the Gospels up at that time were written primarily for the Jewish audience. So Mark went and researched and went back and talked to his elders.
Well, and he admits that.
And he took the Gospel and he made what we call a quick like in a hurry.
That's what
gospel.
You call it.
It's the action gospel. It is action packed.
It is. And
Mark authored that so to give it out to the people that were there, who the Gentiles he was serving.
Well,
Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Was Luke present at the crucifixion? Well, Luke says, I was there when this all went down. That's Luke's whole beginning of his official document to a Roman governor.
Right.
To a Roman ruler. Or Roman official. Is, I was there, and I saw this stuff, and I saw what went down. In fact, Luke is offering his opinion as a semi-outsider. Even though he's a Christian, he is offering the view of someone who wasn't caught up in the very middle of it.
Right.
And guess what? All those guys tell about the same story from a slightly different perspective. John's story, right next to the cross. Matthew's story, somewhere in the crowd. Luke's story, edge observer. So of course,
and a researcher.
Yeah. So of course the stories have slightly different flavors,
and their audience is different.
Yeah.
Matthew is writing strictly for Jews,
and John is writing. This is the Son of God. I want you to know his deity is who he is.
Matthew. That's why Matthew has all the references back to the Old Testament, because the Jews would understand that.
Yeah, he wanted them to know that this was the Messiah.
Mark and Luke don't make those references because their audiences wouldn't understand it.
That's true. They weren't steeped in Judaism.
They're writing to Gentiles, and the Gentiles aren't going to know the Old Testament well enough to say, "Hey, I know that quote."
Right.
Even most Christians nowadays don't know the Old Testament well enough to say, "Hey, I know that quote."
Sure.
And then, like you said, John is his whole point was to prove the deity of Christ.
Absolutely.
He was not writing a strict narrative for a specific group. He was writing a narrative to prove one fact.
Right.
Which was that Jesus was deity.
Right.
Which is why a lot of times in evangelism you point people toward John first.
Oh, yeah.
Is because that's what gives you that deity edge. Now, if you're talking to a Jewish person, sure, point them to Matthew first. Even nowadays, that would probably work better because they would respect the conjunction of the Old Testament and New Testament. So when you're reading the Gospels, you got to understand not only who's writing it, but who they're writing it for.
Oh, well, and of course, again, I'm going to say this, that the fact that the stories have a little variation, but still the same fact, is another evidence that it's each person's actual own, individually owned story. And I think that's important. Graham, you and I worked for the state. Have we gone in this? And I say you and I never served on a cell extraction team, but Graham,
not together.
Not together. But right, not together. Okay, but if we had, will your report about that be like mine?
Well, no, because I had a different point of view than you did.
You also may have had a different job,
and I have a different writing style.
And you have you may have a different task.
So
I wouldn't write the same thing because I might be on a lower flank. I might be after the leg.
Right.
When your job is to control an arm or a torso, you're going to write it based off that, or we might go all kinds of different directions till we're not even where we were started.
If you're on a leg and I'm on an arm, you may see something from behind me that I can't see.
Will your story and your statement you write match mine?
Well, the story would be the same, but the perspective would be different.
So it matches it more in what we call a jigsaw puzzle. In other words, you get the full picture by doing what? By
reading all of them.
Getting them all of them. So when the state takes all of our statements together from all the men on the team of 5, are they going to read the exact same report from each one of them?
No, and if they do, they're going to get suspicious.
Right, because they know you all didn't do exactly the same thing. You observed the same event, but from 5 different views.
Right.
So that is the case of it here.
So I want to, right quick, I've started doing this and I like doing it. So if you want to find the biblical narratives that we've been talking about, and I will get there in just one second because I moved them for Matthew and Luke, and I want to make sure I give you proper citations here so nobody can tell me I said something wrong. Alright, so in Matthew, the death of Jesus is recorded in Matthew chapter 27, verse 45 through 56. So Matthew 27, 45 through 56. Not a long section on the actual death.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you go back to the trial and the scourging and the death and the, all that and the burial, then it's a little bit longer. In Mark is chapter 15, verse 33 through 41. In Luke, it's chapter 23, verse 44 through 49. And in John is chapter 19, 28 and 30. Really short on the actual death of Jesus. Again, all of them, if you go into the trial and the other steps, it's a lot longer. There's usually a couple of chapters when you go into the whole story.
Right.
But the actual moment that he died, they're very short narratives. It's actually kind of interesting to read the 4 of them together. So I like giving people the biblical narrative, the biblical citation for those that may not know how to look it up. Some people are just, I will say biblically illiterate, and
Sure.
I don't mean that as an insult. They just don't know.
Right.
And if we don't help them find out, then what are we doing?
And it's easy for people to just make the claim, oh, this is all made up and it's not true. And people made this up, the book's made up, and I knew it all along. And some folks, if they haven't read it, they'll go, that's made up. And then they won't consider what the Word of God has to say for reality. But it's easy for people to say that. And they wouldn't need to pick on this book if obviously something wasn't so interesting about it. I mean, you've got to understand part of the reason why I believe that this is real is because of the level of resistance to it.
Well,
that if it wasn't worthwhile, it wouldn't be so resisted by what I believe is a present and real enemy. And that's not a person, but I happen to believe a very real spirit. And we call it the spirit of the Antichrist, which you can call it various things. You say, oh, the devil. But I just say it's that same thing. It's, if it's like, when you have such level resistance to it, a negative image or a shadow image is left, and you go, if everyone's trying to resist that one thing,
why?
It almost proves that that one thing exists, doesn't it?
Well, I've always said, atheists and non-Christians are always attacking the Bible and attacking God and attacking all this stuff that they say doesn't exist. Oh, atheists say it doesn't exist.
Sure. But that's what atheists do.
And my question...
That's what atheists do.
And
why would it surprise you?
Hold on.
My
question has always been, well, I don't believe the tooth fairy exists, but I don't run around spending all my time attacking the tooth fairy. Or as somebody said about Christopher Hitchens, and I think it might have been Frank Turek, but don't hold me to that. But one of the modern Christian apologists said they debated Christopher Hitchens and they could boil down his argument to one thing: there is no God and I hate him.
There is no God and I hate him. And I think you've hit upon one of my pet peeves, Graham, where people say if God exists, he can't exist. Because if he did, then all these bad things that happen wouldn't happen. But if he did, he'd be to blame. And I'm like, what?
Well, I like the way they summed that up. Is no, because I think a lot of atheists feel that way. There is no God, and I hate him. Well, why do you hate him if he doesn't exist? It makes you wonder about what these people really think sometimes. And I'm not saying that Christopher Hitchens wasn't a brilliant man, because he was a very smart man. He was wrong about a lot of things, but he was a very smart man. Very articulate until it came to talking about God. And then he just got angry and called you names.
Because that's easy. And it's frustrating.
I don't understand how such a brilliant man and such a great debater.
Why is Jesus so frustrating to these people?
I don't know.
Why? I mean, he hasn't done anything to you.
Well, I do know.
Well, I'm saying he hasn't done anything to you.
Because they have to prove that he doesn't exist, or they've got an answer to him.
And that's
what they're really scared of.
Deep down, it's the human desire to not have anybody really be able to call you into account. Because Jesus Christ is who he is, then God is who he is. And if God is who he is, then you're answerable to God.
Right.
Because he makes the claim as being the creator, and therefore the authority. And then he has the right to say what you should and shouldn't, can and can't, and he can call sin sin. And that's what it goes down to. Deep down, this is all about humans not wanting to be told what to do.
I'm right,
which is the most selfish, childish reason for any existence.
And that is exactly why we're talking about the actual death of Jesus. Why you have to believe that Jesus actually died is because if he didn't, he couldn't resurrect.
That's right.
We've said from episode 1 of this series with the virgin birth, they all connect. If he wasn't virgin born, then he couldn't have lived a sinless life. And if he didn't die, he couldn't have resurrected. And if he didn't resurrect, he can't come back again. So...
Right. And we see these things as linked, and they are linked. Because we're talking about an individual.
They have to be linked.
They're linked because we're talking about this one person who was this one thing.
And if you don't want to call yourself a Christian, that's fine.
Right.
I'm not going to stand on the street corner and yell at you.
You do not have to be.
Job.
You do not have to be a Christian.
No, you don't.
You do not have to believe in God. You do not have to believe in Christ. I will tell you that is a choice you can make. I will also tell you that I hope you make the right choice, because God is very real. Christ is very real. Your not believing in him doesn't change him. Doesn't change his validity. It doesn't change you are going to answer to him. If you don't like that, that's you. You don't have to like it. You don't have to believe it. But I will tell you, when you are looking me in the eye, and I'm looking you in the eye, and we're there, standing before God, you will know it was your choice, and you're not going to blame me.
Well, and my thing is, you don't have to believe in these things,
right?
But in order to call yourself a Christian, you have got to believe in these things. And
then looking at it on the positive side, look what we are talking about. This is the offer of God's love. Well, His mercy, His grace, His care, His blessing, His adoption for you.
I think.
Which one of those things is bad? Which one of those things is harmful for you? Which one of those things brings something negative into your life? Nothing but positive. Nothing but what is good. I mean, Christianity believes that you're equal because God's the creator.
Right.
Christianity believes that racism is wrong because God made everyone. The Word of God supports only that view. That God made everyone and all are His creation. You're responsible for what you do to your neighbor, no matter who the neighbor may be. Yeah. The Word of God bears these things out, and something that's full of love and respect. It tells you not to just be wantonly angry at people, not to hate, not to kill, not to want what your neighbor has.
Well, I'll throw one more
thing. What is wrong with that?
Before we get out of here. Here's always been my argument, and it's not a real intellectual argument. I'll give you that. I'm not real intellectual, but here's my argument. If the atheists are right, what have I lost?
Right.
If I'm right, what have the atheists lost?
Mm-hmm.
And if anybody can answer that question and make it positive for the atheists, so be it.
And my thing is,
I don't think you can, though.
And my thing is this. This is about experiencing what God has for you. The love He has for you.
Yeah.
The care He wants to give you. Your life is sucking. Well, that's the world. Try Jesus Christ and what He is, and what God's offering you.
And things are still going to suck at times.
And things can suck at times. But guess what? You're not by yourself anymore. You're not alone anymore. You have someone that has your back. You have someone who understands you. You have someone that you can go to over what's going on in your life. And what's crazy is you have someone to deal with what you've done when you've screwed things up.
And you have.
And everyone hearing us has
and everyone
talking
up. Right now.
Everyone talking about it has screwed up. And we all know it. We all know it. But what does the Word of God say on this? And it says that the Lord has laid on Him. It says, all we, just like sheep, have gone astray.
Yeah.
We've turned everyone to his own way. Daniel and Graham. Of course we have.
Yeah.
The Word of God says it. We know we did.
We know we did. No doubt about it.
But the Lord has laid on Him the iniquity of us all. And where did He lay that iniquity? On Christ. Where was that? On the cross. As He died. As a propitiation. That means a replacement. And He did it.
Oh, you just like big words.
I do. But also, I like Sister Savage. Sister Savage, one of my teachers, she said, if you use those words in the pulpit, I'm going to come find you and slap you. I love her. So we are talking about those 5 things you've got to believe to be a Christian.
Number 1.
And we're going to go through that list again. Number 1, the virgin birth of Jesus Christ.
Number 2.
Number 2 was that He lived a sinless life.
Number 3.
Well, that's the one we just dealt with today, which is the crucifixion of Jesus Christ.
Oh, good. I'm glad you didn't forget it then.
Actual and real death.
Number 4.
Resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Number 5.
That He is imminent returning or the second coming of Christ.
That's fine. We can count to 5.
Man, I've enjoyed it so much, Graham. It's an interesting and kind of heavy topic. We kind of get light with some things, but this is the root of all we believe in.
Oh, yeah.
It's the absolute root of what we have and what we are, what God's done for us is based in Jesus Christ.
And I think the great thing is where all this came from. We were riding together one evening talking like we are wont to do. And I was telling you about a sermon that I heard preached by a minister who apparently has some education. And she was preaching on the demoniac. the guy that was living in the cemetery because he couldn't be around people because he was so bad for them. And they tried to tie him up, and he broke the ropes, and they tried to chain him up, and they broke the chains. You know, this was a serious guy. And she tried to make that whole story about him having a mental health problem and the town outcasting him because he had a mental health problem. And I got in the car after that sermon, and my wife looked at me and asked me what I thought about the sermon. I said, "You don't want me to answer that question."
Right.
And she said, "Why?" I said, "Because right now I'm so angry. I can spit nails."
Because you look at the denial of one as a domino effect toward the denial of the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, the next thing.
What I told you the other night, and I don't know if I could have, I was so angry, I don't know if I could have articulated it that day. But if you deny Jesus casting out the demons out of this man, if he can't do that, then there's no way he can resurrect. And if he can't resurrect, then it's all for naught. That's what Paul said.
That's exactly right, man. That's it.
It still makes me angry just thinking about it.
Sure it will. Well, that's it for the Bunker Brothers on this episode. We thank you so much for bringing along with us on this ride, and we want to just thank you for listening. Please feel free to contact us on email or drop us a line on Facebook. We would love to hear from you. If you're listening, tell us what's going on in your life. We'd like to hear from you.
Oh, we haven't said it lately.
What's that?
But like, comment, subscribe, share.
Comment, subscribe, shares, and like you says,
if you liked it, do all those things, and if you didn't like it, do all those things anyway.
Remember, no Daniels or Grahams were hurt in the making of this episode, and please don't squeeze the Graham.